Cool. I think that's up on the screen. Give me a
Yes,
thumbs up
yes,
if
it
you
is.
guys can
Actually, we
see
can
that.
see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So yeah, we're going to be doing this this drawing honor now. I know that I was already seeing a couple of comments in the chat that people are excited about drawing. Hopefully you guys do a little bit of drawing already, but we want to take you through some tips to help just improve your drawing. Now, as I'm doing this, please keep in touch, type answers if we ask questions in the chat, and Dayan's going to kind of relate some of those to me as we go. So
That's right.
that's how we'll keep on with it. But yeah, before we start, I'll just introduce myself, who I am. My name's Ashley. At the moment, I'm a youth leader in my local church, which is in Riverway in Kent. I know we have a couple of people from there online. But I'm also an illustrator. So I've drawn ever since I was a child, probably before I could walk or talk. And I studied illustration and design at university. I work freelance, so I do illustrations for books and magazines, as well as some photography, but I also sometimes teach digital drawing classes. And the thing that motivates me the most, the thing that I like doing the most actually, is doing illustrations for evangelism or media. So I've done some illustrations for things like the Sabbath School Quarterlies, and I'm working with a project, if anyone knows about Lineage. It's a project we look at Adventists in Christian history, and we do some work for that as well. So I definitely stay busy with drawing. These are a couple of examples of the type of drawing I do. There's many different types, but mostly digital nowadays, but also some traditional drawing and painting as well. Cool. Now, before we get started, hopefully everyone's got their worksheet printed out, or you've got it to hand, because we're going to be going through the worksheet. There'll be some questions I'm asking you guys, and again, if you could type the answers in the chat and then read out your answers. But there's also going to be some activities, so hopefully you've already got this. If you don't, you will need to just grab a piece of paper, probably about 4 pieces of paper, and a pencil at least, or some other things to draw with. But yeah, let's get straight into it. So we're going to start off by looking at materials for drawing. So when you say drawing, there's loads of different types of art, but drawing specifically, there are some media, what we call media, which is basically the tools you'll use to draw. I'd love to know if you guys can just type in the chat. Can you guys name any of the tools that you might draw with?
It's a very good question. So guys, the chat is open for everybody, and so we just want to know, is it can you please put it in a chat? What tool would you use? Okay, people are writing down. They're saying
Awesome.
Pencils. Some people are saying brushes. Some people are saying marker. They would use rubber for erasing. Some people are going high tech. They're like, I'm using my iPad for drawing.
Okay.
And crayon, and felt tips, and a few others, actually.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so all of those, absolutely great answers. I've written down a few, but like we said, these aren't the only options, but things like definitely pencils, probably the first one that's going to come up. You have different types of pencils. You have the normal sort of black and white drawing pencils, or graphite pencils, colored pencils, obviously. We have charcoal, chalk, pastels, pen, ink. Even I draw a lot in ballpoint pen, so biros. I draw a lot in biros. And today I'm actually drawing with an iPad. It's what we're doing the presentation on. But I also do a lot of my art with digital art and an iPad. But the good news is, whatever one of those materials you're working with today, that's going to be fine. Everything we talk about today, you're going to be able to do on traditional pen and pencil and paper, or on digital stuff if you have that. Now, there's also, when we look at all these different types of media, there is the possibility of kind of mixing and matching media in your drawings. So this is what we mean by mixed media drawings. Some of these things pretty extreme. I found all these online. So that first one where the lady's got a dress made out of lettuce, that's kind of mixing media. Hopefully you don't do too much of that. But you can see we have things like pen and pencil drawings. You can draw on different materials as well. Sometimes drawing on bits of cardboard or bits of newspaper can be a really cool effect. So after today, when you try out some of this for yourself, it'd be great to see if you can work with mixed media as well. Okay, now talking about drawing, one thing that we want to really look at today is the technique of drawing, sort of ways of drawing that can make your drawings more realistic. So I want to introduce a term to you guys, which some of you may have heard of before, which is something called chiaroscuro. I'm not Italian. I may be pronouncing that badly. I don't know if it's chiaroscuro or chiaroscuro. But does anyone know what this term means, what that word means?
Let's see. Does anybody know what it means? Because the answer is very simple. Actually, we say we have no idea.
Okay, cool. That's everyone's journey with the
Wait,
answer.
actually, I'm
Oh,
sorry. Somebody said it says shading.
yes, I think I see. Blessing said shading. Okay. Yeah, you're along the right lines with the shading. So chiaroscuro, it's an old term. They came up with it in what we call the Renaissance, where people are rediscovering a lot of different art techniques. Basically, what chiaroscuro means is in art, it's the strong contrast between light and dark. And people apply this basically to make things look more realistic or more 3D. So I don't know if you guys can see the background. That's a really famous painting called Girl with a Pearl Earring. But it's just one example of how they used to use light and shadow really strongly in art, that contrast between light and dark areas. And the point of doing that is it makes your drawing look more realistic. Because if you think about it, we're 3D, we're real people, right? You can touch us and there's something really there. But when we're drawing on a flat piece of paper on a 2D surface. So the question is, how do you get something that's essentially on a flat piece of paper to look like it's 3D, like it's real? And one of the best ways is by using light and dark shading. So the areas that would be farther away from the light, you'll do them darker. The areas that are closer to the light, you'll do them lighter. And if you get it right, then even though it's on a flat piece of paper, your drawing is going to look really realistic in 3D. So we're going to work a bit on that today. Does that make sense, guys? Awesome. I see some nodding. Fantastic. So yeah, someone's got the dictionary definition, I think, already there. Well done, David. So we're going to do a little exercise to kind of practice working with chiaroscuro, which is we're going to make a value scale. Now, values is a term we basically use to mean sort of shading, the tone, whether it goes from light or dark. That's what the value is. And what I'd love you to do, if you've got your worksheets, is you should see on your worksheet a little box here. On that box, I'd love you to start actually drawing a value scale. If you're using digital, you can just do it on your digital app as well. But what I mean by that is I want you to start shading really lightly and then press down harder and harder and harder. And we're going to try and I've got 9, you can get 9 or 10 different values if you can. But I want you to try just very quickly in the next couple of minutes, shading, starting really light and going all the way to dark shading. And we'll show you why in a little bit. So if that's all right, that's our first mini exercise. I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes to do this. And just so I'm not being lazy, I'm going to join in with you. I've got a kind of sheet here and I'll draw along with you. So you can get started. I'm just going to set up my paper. And by the way, when you're shading, one thing that really helps to get that value right is instead of shading sort of top down with the point of the pencil, is to tilt the pencil to the side. And that sometimes lets you get a much lighter area and a broader area. It's a bit easier to shade when you tilt your pencil to the side. So this is what we're talking about. We'll start off with a fairly light value. We'll press a little bit harder for the next one, a little bit harder for the next one after that. And it's a really good exercise because the more you do this, the more you learn to kind of control the strokes that you're making. And in the end, you can press down really hard, maybe go over some of the same areas to get those values even darker. If you have got maybe as dark as you think you can go to the other end of the scale. Maybe you can try out going a little bit lighter with your shading as well. Cool. Does that make sense, guys? Everyone got a value scale?
Yep. And actually, some people are asking about the sharpness of your pen and things like this. Does it make a difference? And what would you do?
Really good question. So yes, this is something now for this class. Hopefully everyone's got at least one pencil. But one thing that I'd really suggest is if you want to get into drawing more, having a few different types of material can help. So With pencils, instead of just maybe one pencil, or usually if you buy a pencil on its own, it might be an HB pencil or a 2B pencil. That designation, whether it's HB, 2B, 4B, or 6B, is talking about how soft the lead in the pencil is. If it's a higher number, the lead is softer, and softer pencils are easier to get darker marks with. So something like a 6B pencil will give you a really dark kind of tone, like at the end of our scale. Something really light, like a 2H pencil or a 4H pencil, will have a really hard tip, and it will be hard to get darker colors. You'll get a very light color with it. So I would usually try and draw with maybe 2 or 3 different types of pencils, maybe a 2H, an HB or a 2B, or a 2H, a 2B, and a 6B pencil. And then when you're working to the dark areas, instead of having to press down really hard, you can just get the softer pencil, and that will give you those darker tones. And you can also use other types of things. So sometimes I'd use chalk and pencil, or charcoal and pencil, if I wanted to shade a bigger area. Cool. Any other questions, Darren? I think we're...
No, actually, that's all. That's all for now.
Okay, fantastic. So...
Actually, sorry. I saw it. Someone just asked, what digital app is that one? Just for those who like to use that on the iPad or any other tablet.
No worries. So I should say, first of all, there's a lot of apps that can give you the same kind of effect. I'm using an app called Procreate that I've got for my iPad, which is a very good app. It's about £10, so it's not super cheap, but you know, it's a one-off cost. And I use Procreate for most of my digital art. But there's quite a few other apps. I know, Dan, you were saying earlier, you use an app called Paper. There's a few other apps that you could use.
Excellent. So actually, you just take us forward because of time.
Sure, no worries. Okay, well, the next thing we're going to talk about is some techniques. Now, I think before we get into different techniques for doing drawings itself, there are different types of things that you can draw in terms of your subject matter. So there's 4 types of subject matter I wanted to point out, which is portraits, landscapes, still life, and abstract. So again, in the chat, guys, can anyone tell me what each of those are? If you can give me a definition of what portrait is, landscape, still life, and abstract drawings.
All right, portrait, drawing.
Yeah. Anyone know what portrait is?
Yeah, they're saying it's a drawing of a face of a person. Let me just see. Also, I'm monitoring as well Facebook. Portrait is drawing people's faces. That's what they're saying. For the landscape, people are saying. For the landscape, people are saying that is drawing the nature, the hills, rivers, mountains. Still life is, and also they're saying for landscape is drawing animals. Still life, that is okay. The still life is when you draw a vase, pumpkin, and a few other. Yeah. Okay.
Some great answers.
And then the abstract is. Let me just see for abstract. Well, nobody's writing anything about abstract at the moment, so we need to.
Well, it's probably the hardest one, I'll be honest. Well, let me help you guys out.
There is somebody just put, you draw random stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty close. So here's 4 examples, guys, by various different artists. So yeah, I think you're along the right lines. So portrait is generally a drawing of a person. I suppose some people would define portraits as animals, pets as well, you could say, but generally it's a drawing of a person. It's the same with photography. That, you know, when you're capturing a person, that would be a portrait. A landscape is all about scenery. It doesn't have to be nature. You can have a landscape of a city as well, but it's where you're actually drawing something that's not focused on one person, but it's an environment that you're drawing. Still life is a collection of objects. So that can be natural objects, like probably one of the most famous still life is things like fruit bowls or flowers. But usually people will draw still lives. They're great practice because they don't move, so it's a bit easier to draw them, and you can focus on shading and how light works. But you could also try and do a still life that means something. So if I wanted to do something that was about me, I could do a portrait that looks like me, but I might get a collection of my favorite things and arrange them and draw them as a still life. And then abstract, you guys have pretty much got it. It's hard to explain because it is pretty much just playing around with shapes and forms and colors, but it doesn't have to look like anything really realistic. Abstract can be just, you know, an expression of different shapes that you like the look of or movement that you like the look of. Does that make sense, guys? Cool, fantastic. So we're going to start off by looking at the best way to get started with some of these drawings. And we're pretty much going to start off with something that would be very helpful if you were drawing maybe portraits or maybe still lifes especially, which is where do you get started when you're actually trying to do a drawing, when you're trying to start a drawing. I don't know if anyone else has this thing where you have a blank piece of paper in front of you, you want to draw something, but you just get stuck. You don't know where to start with it. So this is a really good thing to do to get you going with a drawing. And it's a way to make sure that before you commit to doing any really dark shading or really detailed areas, that everything in your drawing is right. The size of your objects, where they're placed, and all of that kind of thing, that they're correct. So does anyone have any guesses what's a good way to start a drawing to make sure that all the detail you add later would be correct?
Okay, Ashley asked the question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, they're saying start drawing lightly. That's what they're saying. Focus on a base, light shading, sketching. That's what I say. So this is what is coming through at the moment. Actually, I have a feeling they're not very far from what you're gonna say.
They are amazing. You guys are a great class. Yeah,
that's why, because they are Pathfinders. Actually, just like
they are Pathfinders. You can tell. So let's have a look. You guys are right. We would sketch lightly, sketch a guide. There's a technical term for this kind of rough sketching, which is called using construction lines. So this, depending what you're drawing, you might start off with a really, really simple construction line. My construction line might almost look like a stick man when I start, just to get the proportions and the angle of the body. But then if I've got a bit more time, I might add some basic shapes. So you can see in this little drawing down here, these construction lines are actually made of simple shapes like circles and sort of cylinders to make the arms and legs. But it's a really good way, because if I start with those construction lines that are drawn really lightly, if I make a mistake at that stage, I can rub it out and start again without having done too much work. Whereas if I start drawing straight away really hard in lines that are difficult to erase, then I'm kind of stuck. So I'd always start with these kind of construction lines. And I'll give you an example. I've got here something that I might be trying to draw, which is a horse. Now, I'm going to pretend that I'm drawing this from life, but let's say I was drawing this, if I was possibly drawing this from a photo or drawing this from a horse that was in front of me. If I wanted to make my drawing look accurate, before I started doing all that detail around the eyes or the mouth, what I would do is try and break it down into the shapes that make up the horse and draw those construction lines. So I've drawn these already. I'll show you what they would look like. You can see I've picked out the bigger shapes with circles. So that point at the sort of front of the horse near its chest, where its front legs would be, I've drawn that as a big circle. Where his sort of hip joints where its back legs are, I do that as another big circle. And then the big shapes of its head. And then just picking out those joints, the knees and the feet as big circles, and then kind of joining them up so that the arms and legs and body are almost like cylinder shapes, but the big parts of the body are like circles. And the great thing is, if I take the photo away, you can see if I just started my drawing like that, you can already tell the size of my horse, the proportions are correct, everything looks okay. But most importantly, if I then want to add any detail, I can add detail and it's going to look right. It's going to look accurate. Does that make sense, guys? Excellent. Cool. So I've talked a lot. I would like
just for everybody who's watching this, in case, guys, if you were like, oh, what I'm going to do, am I going to be able to do it now? Don't worry. This session is recorded. You can always go back and pause it and see the hand moves that they actually made. So it will give you a better idea. So just don't worry. This will be available also on YouTube, but also on the Facebook page. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Exactly as Dan said, but also, if you guys are ready, I would love us to actually do our first actual exercise. So this is the part, if you've got your paper, if you've got your pencils, we're going to do this activity. Now I'm going to do it together with you. So I'll give you the option. If you would prefer to draw your own animal, I would absolutely love that. Feel free to use your own shapes to make up the body of your own animal. If you're more comfortable, follow along with me. I'm going to start drawing now, and I'll talk you through the shapes that we're going to use to make this animal, and you can draw the same animal as me. So you've got the choice, but we're going to get started. So I'm going to bring us back to our drawing app. I'll take away these lines I've done, and we're going to start drawing with some shapes. Now, one of my favorite animals, I've been lucky enough to see these in the wild, is a lion. So I think I'm going to try and draw a lion. That's how I'm going to get started. If you are following along with me, then just do what I do and we'll draw a lion together. We're going to do this fairly quickly. But the first thing I'm going to do for my lion is draw a big shape, just like I did with the horse, for the front of the body, the shoulders. That's a big circle. Cool. And now after that, I'm going to try and draw another slightly smaller shape, another circle for the back legs of the lion, because the lion's front legs are a bit more powerful than its back legs, and that part is a little bit bigger. And so that it looks like the actual lion's body, I'm then going to get two lines here to join those shapes together. So that's our lion's body. Cool. So everyone following along with that, we've got our two circles and the lines joining them. Okay. Now, what I want to start adding in now is the legs and the neck, the biggest. We go from like the bigger shapes down to the smaller shapes. So the legs, I'm not going to just draw like that, because if you really look at a lion, no lion's legs go vertically down like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get the sort of curve that you get on a lion's leg. I'm going to start with a little, almost semicircular shape that you'd get in the back of a lion's leg here. It's like a D, like a big capital D. And that's like a lion's thigh. And then with that as a starting point, I'm gonna draw, this is the back leg, just a rectangle extending down from the bottom of that D. Okay. And then just the very back part of that lion's leg, there'll be another rectangle that comes forward, because that's how lions' back legs, a lot of animals' back legs look like that. They kind of bend back and then go forward again. And then finally, the back foot is just going to be like a little wedge, like so. Again, these are just rough lines, so don't worry if they're not perfect, but that's what we kind of want to have for our back leg, that big D with a thigh, and then a rectangle, and then another rectangle. And then how about the front leg? Well, the front leg doesn't bend back as much as that. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to, so let's make sure we've got our right color there. So yeah, what I'm going to do for that front leg is more of a straight leg. It's like another rectangle, another shorter, maybe a square shape above it. So sort of straight rectangle down to the ground, and then a square for the actual joint, and then just another wedge shape for the feet. So we're just using those shapes to make our lion. And then to make it look really realistic, we want to make sure our neck is the next thing we draw. We want to make sure the neck is about the right size and shape. That's about right for our neck. And again, you can do this almost like a rectangular shape, but it's not completely rectangular because it's a little thinner at the top here than it is at the bottom. But it's a bit of a rectangle. And then finally, we're going to take another rectangle that's a bit thinner at the far end than it is at the close end to get the shape of our lion's head. Some triangles for the ears. And also a little circle here, that's for our cheeks. Lions have kind of big cheeks at the base of the head. Now, it looks a bit strange at the moment. We're not completely finished yet. One other thing I want to do, I just want to put in a mouth and the head to show where it goes. And obviously it wouldn't be a lion without a tail, just at the back. And the tail, I can't really think of a shape to draw. It's just a tail shape. So long, kind of thin shape with a little puffy tail at the end. So those are the basic shapes to draw out our lion. Hopefully you guys are all following along. Cool. Now, once I've got those basic shapes, I'm going to actually try and turn this into a finished drawing. So there's a few other elements I might add. I might just add another back leg. So I'm going to do this in one go, but it's basically the same as that back leg that we had before. Another front leg maybe. But then what I do is I just draw over the top of this to make it look really realistic. So I'm actually going to do this by drawing another layer. If you're drawing on a piece of paper, then you can just press down harder and that'll give you the same effect. But I'm just going to go over this and draw the things to make this look like a real lion. So over the top of my shapes, I'm going to, there we go, make that a bit smaller. I'm going to just draw a rough outline of what my actual lion would look like. So this is the part, usually takes a bit longer. Don't worry if this part doesn't look perfect for you guys, because we're really just trying to see the technique. But just to show you where you'd go when you've finished adding in the rough shapes, I'm going to do this pretty sketchily just to show you how it would work. But that's the point where we'd start adding our lion's details. So you can see the mane would be about here. And usually the hair from the mane would go all the way over the lion's legs. But using those shapes we've drawn out, we would be able to draw the lion's feet, like so. And lion's body. And I think as well, later on, if you guys have drawn something, you're really happy with it, I can see some of your screens. I'd love to see you maybe drawing some of your drawings. You can hold them up to the camera if you've got pieces of paper with your drawings.
Also, actually, just to let you know, we ask our participants to send us their drawings or their crafts every week.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
As we're drawing this, I'm going to post my email address in the chat room. Make sure you guys send us what you draw, because we would love to see it. Every Wednesday we do it, so make sure you do it before Wednesday. We already have a group of crafts and different things that we're preparing for this coming Wednesday, and we would love to have your drawings as well. And you have an amazing teacher. Just to let you know, guys, if you didn't know about Ashley, Ashley does this well, not every day, but he does these live presentations for the Apple. So if you're wondering, and that's not Apple from the supermarket, it's the company, and does this here in United Kingdom. They have these huge screens which they would use, and Ashley is one of these guys who actually stands in front of people. And as you were thinking that this might be a potato, but is starting to be the lion, that's exactly what he does. He actually shows young people how to improve the drawing and how to use these products like iPad and other things. So that's what Ashley does.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. So yeah, you guys can see we started off with our shapes. If you look at the screen, can you see how we've turned that into a line? I'm even going to hide the layer with the shapes on. You can see that's starting to look like a lion already. But yeah, if you guys have been following along, I'll give you guys a few more seconds or minutes. But if you guys have drawn anything, obviously this is a lot faster than we'd usually be drawing. So don't worry if it's not completely finished yet. But if you have got anything that you're happy with, please feel free to hold it up to the screen.
On the other hand as well, actually, if you move on with your presentation as well, just because of time, and then what we're going to do is, as somebody is doing it, on the end, we can have a moment where you can show your stuff, guys. And bottom line is, if you don't manage to do it right now, don't worry. We're gonna post all your photos and the drawings and pictures on the Wednesday. So that's what we're gonna do. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, let's return back to the presentation. So keep hold of those drawings. There is another we're going to do straight away. So you can use the same drawings that you have been drawing. But what we wanted to do next is we wanted to look at adding some of that stuff we've been learning about shading, and the values, that shading, is going to be the thing that makes our drawing look really 3D and professional. So keep your drawing that you're doing now, because that's the one we're going to work on. If you want to draw a different animal, obviously feel free to draw something else and shade it. But yeah, what we mean by this exercise is we're going to try and use our shading to make our animals look 3D. So I'll give you some examples here. These are photos of some animals, but you've got to think about how the shading that you add would make your animals look much more realistic. So there's different ways that this might happen. If you have a look, for example, at what we've got here, the cat, we can see the kind of realism that the shading gives us is that down here, we've got all our sort of dark color going on to show where the cat's in shadow. And the part that we're really focusing on, the face here, that's getting all the light. So when we're shading, we'd press down really hard to get that shadow area to show the parts that's in shadow. And then the part of the face that's in light, we'll shade really lightly. You can also do that to show color. So on this next drawing of the bird, the black area, that's where we just shade really hard. And even though we're only drawing in black and white, we'd use a lighter type of shading to indicate the different highlights, the yellow and the green areas. Now, you might also, what I really love with this drawing of the dog here, is that you've got what we call edge highlights, which are these areas just at the edge of the dog's fur that are really, really bright. And with that, that allows us to make it look even more realistic, because when you look at objects sometimes, I can see it on some of your screens, the guys that are on video on Zoom, if you're next to a window, you might see a really light highlight on the side of your face from the window or the light source. So when you draw that really light edge highlight, that makes your drawings look really realistic. And then finally, you've got the option to use those really dark versus light areas, that contrast area, to make your drawing look more detailed. So if you were drawing this iguana, all those little scales, if you use the darker areas and then the light contrast to pick out those scales, you get not only a really realistic looking drawing, but a really detailed one as well. So if that all makes sense, what we're going to do is go back to our drawing that we've just been doing, our lion drawing, and we're going to try and add a little bit of shading to our drawings just to make them look much more realistic. So if you go back to your drawing, pick it up. Now, I'm going to do something to mine which can be really helpful. I'm actually, because this is digital, one of the things I'm able to do, so I can make my background a little bit darker. And if you're not using digital art, you can get the same effects by drawing on different surfaces. So one surface I'd really recommend drawing on is if you've got a cardboard box lying around, instead of just drawing on a white piece of paper, you could draw on a brown cardboard box. And the reason you might do that is because you can then add those edge highlights with a white pencil. And so I'm going to add some shadows with our shading like we've been talking about. And I'm also going to add a bit of a white pencil highlight as well. So let's go ahead, let's start drawing on our picture of the lion. So I'm going to start thinking about shading. Now, when you're thinking about shading an animal, one thing that you really have to think about, or shading anything, is where the light is coming from. So if I say my light is coming from here, then the part that's going to be in the darkest shadow is the part like here under the leg that we can't really see because that's going to be hidden. So I'm going to put my darkest shadows on the areas that the light would find it hard to reach. So let's focus on there. Let's focus on maybe under the stomach just here. And what we'll see as we start adding our shading is the areas that we start shading, it starts looking less like a sketch of an animal and much more like a realistic drawing. So all the areas away from the light, so on the far side of the light from the animal, I'm just going to add a bit of shading. And you can see already that's starting to look pretty realistic, right, guys? So I don't know, Dan, if anyone's got any questions as we're doing this in the chat. One question that always comes up for me.
Some people asking, actually, are there any free apps that can be used for drawing? That's one of the questions that you would recommend. maybe you don't know from top of the head, but okay. If there are some, let us know, Ashley. Others are
Awesome.
saying, we love your presentation. You need to know that. And somebody says, it's amazing. And I fully agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. Many people are saying hello to you, Ashley, and to and to few of us. Yeah, that's right. Somebody says, Ashley, you are pro. Of course. I'm so sorry, Ashley.
Only the best for the Pathfinders, that's what I say.
Like Ashley's like my favorite of the day, but you need to know that every single time I needed a poster to be designed, I went to Ashley, and then I found out that Ashley is busy. Just to let you know, that's how busy he is. Yeah, people are saying hello from Rwanda. Other people are saying, Ashley, when did you start drawing yourself? When did you find love for drawing, Ashley?
That's a really good question. Thanks, guys. Yeah, no, I actually started drawing pretty much when I was a child. It's one of my earliest memories is that I could definitely draw before I could even talk or really walk properly. And when I started out, I was definitely drawing over the walls of my house, which I don't recommend. But yeah, it couldn't sort of stop the creativity when I was a child. But I always found I'm like a natural fidgeter. So if you have me sitting in class listening to a lesson, I struggle to sit still. Even in church, sometimes I struggle to sit still. So one thing that always helped me was actually drawing. I could concentrate more if I was drawing while I was doing something else. So yeah, if anyone else is always really active, I'd recommend drawing as a really cool way to calm you down. Cool. Oh, okay, quick thing, guys. I've done my shading. You can see this line, it's starting to look much more realistic, isn't it? Now, there's one thing that I'd always recommend as well, is that if you want your shading to look real, don't just shade the object, but think about that object. It would cast a shadow itself. So underneath this lion, I'm going to draw the shadow where the light wouldn't be able to reach. And then the other thing I'm going to do, this is if you had different colored pencils, I'd make sure you can get a white pencil or white piece of chalk, is I might also pick out in white the areas, the highlight areas, where that highlight would reach. And so these are going to be usually just the opposite side to the areas where the shadow would go, sort of on top of the lion's head and those other areas. But sometimes that can really make your drawings look more realistic. And like I said, if you do this, if you're drawing on maybe a piece of cardboard or something, it's a lot easier to add these highlights because your paper isn't the whitest thing in your drawing. Your paper lets you draw with lighter tones, like white pencil or white chalk.
As you're drawing this, I just want to say hello to Tumelo Musanda. He wrote a message to say hello to Pastor Dan. And as Ashley is just drawing this, I can actually use these few seconds to say hello. Ashley, many people are saying you're making this look effortless, easy, but reality is what, Ashley? You probably have to practice a lot. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We were definitely going to say it by the end, but it's something you have to say at any point. The only way you're going to get better at drawing consistently, that's guaranteed, and I do guarantee it works, is if you practice. I spend a lot of time drawing, and I learn something every time I do a drawing. So you have to practice. But the good thing about practicing drawing is that it's a lot of fun. So just keep drawing, keep using these principles, and you will get better as you go. Okay. Fantastic. So that's our line drawing, and it's looking pretty realistic, right? Once we add that shading, it looks much more 3D. Now, this is still a fairly quick sketch, but that technique is what allows us to do really, really detailed drawing. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to add some shading to your drawings. I cannot wait to see them. But we're going to move on. Cool. So this has been sort of drawing techniques that you would use, like we said, in portraits, drawing animals. You'd also use the same techniques for still life. So we're going to talk a bit more and show a bit more still life a little later. Before we get to that though, one other thing that's really, really important is something called perspective. So if you guys are on the chat, I'd love you to answer again. We're going to break down what perspective is. So perspective, it's a system of creating an illusion of depth on a flat surface. So to put that in everyday language, it's very similar to what we said we were using shading for. Remember, shading was all about taking something that's flat on a 2D piece of paper, adding some shading to make it look rounded and 3D, like light is really hitting it. Perspective is the same thing. We're taking something that we're drawing that's flat, but we want to make it look like it's actually a real object. And so the way we do that is by introducing perspective, which makes it look like it's, you know, it's got some depth to it. And perspective basically means what something looks like from your point of view. So perspective will change as your point of view changes. So let's have a look at some of these. There's 3 types of linear perspective that I could show you here, and they're called 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. Now, I'll try and explain these a little bit. When you're trying to draw in perspective, this is something that architects use a lot. We talked about landscapes earlier. You would use this a lot in landscape drawings, especially when you're drawing things like buildings. And it's all about how things move away from you. They look like they're getting further away from you. And as they're moving away from you, they're getting smaller. So if you think about this, if you were in a room, if you had a window in the room that was almost right next to your head, that would look quite big. But that same size window, you might have further in the room. And if you put your hand in front of it to measure it, it would look smaller, even though it's physically the same size. And so we show this by making objects smaller as they move away from us. And where they go towards, that's what's called a vanishing point. So I can draw on the page and show you vanishing points. 1-point perspective means that you have one vanishing point. I'm going to show my vanishing points with a little cross here. And what we mean by that is everything's moving towards it. If you look at all the lines in my drawing, every line is moving towards that X. Hopefully that makes sense. And as you move towards it, things are getting smaller and smaller. Now that's the kind of view you would have if you were looking down a corridor or walking down an aisle in a church. You also have 2-point perspective. And 2-point perspective basically means you have 2 vanishing points. So just the same as we had with the other drawing, we're going to draw some X's. And sometimes our vanishing points are sort of off the page. But you can see everything, all the lines in the drawing are getting closer together as they move towards that vanishing point, but also towards this vanishing point as well. So you'd see this kind of view as you were standing sort of maybe in front of a building. You'd see one side of the building seems to get small on this angle, the other side seems to get small on that angle. And I guess from that, you guys can probably guess what 3-point perspective is. It's having 3 vanishing points. And this is something that you'd usually see if you were standing in front of a building, but it was a really tall building, because as well as the same 2 vanishing points, let's get rid of these, as well as the same 2 vanishing points that we had with the other building to the side, things are sort of going towards these vanishing points. You'd also have a vanishing point above or below the building, because you can see these points are converging there. So that's sort of saying something quite quickly that you can spend a lot of time studying in school, but it's all about what your perspective is. If you're looking from the side of a building, you'll see a different perspective than if you're looking down the corridor. Does that make sense, guys? Cool. Any questions that come up on that?
There's quite a few questions that are coming up. Somebody asked the question, how do you show foreground in a landscape?
Oh, really good question. Hold on to it, because that is one of our exercises a bit later. So I won't answer that right now, but later on, I promise to answer that question.
Somebody mentioned after the shading, some people use finger to a little bit smudge it up.
Smudge.
Is that okay?
Yeah, really good question, guys. So yeah, that's usually a really good way of blending your shading, making it look less like you've got harsh lines and more like it's a smooth kind of finish. That can be really good for if you're doing things like faces, if you're doing their skin and you want skin to look smoother. The only thing I'd say is try not to overdo it. You don't want your drawing to look really faded because you've smudged everything. So try and smudge the areas that you want smooth, but leave the areas like the eyes that have a lot of detail, don't smudge those as much.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, excellent. So that's our perspective. Now, the other part of perspective is about how high up you are. Now, remember we mentioned vanishing points. This is a plane where you'd have 2-point perspective. You can see 2 vanishing points on the screen here, but the vanishing points is going to look different depending how high up or low down you are. So we have a bird's eye view, a street level view, and a worm's eye view, or an eye level view, maybe not street level. And what they mean is what you can see from your point of view. So a worm's eye view, obviously you can guess a worm would be below the object because it's very small. Compared to you, a worm would be looking up at you. And so from a worm's eye view, you usually see the underside of an object that you're looking up towards. Street level view would be sort of dead in front of you on your eye line, if you were a person looking at another person. And then a bird's eye view, you're looking down at an object, so you'll see the top of it. So think about this, depending on what you're drawing, it might be good to think about your perspective. If you're drawing something like a small child or a pet dog, you're probably going to have more of a bird's eye view where you can look down and see the top of that dog's head. If you're drawing something like a big tree, you'd probably see the underside of the branches from the worm's eye view. So that perspective is really, really important. Okay, cool. Now we have another exercise. So this might be the last exercise we get to do in the class. The other exercises you may have to do as homework if you like and share. But let's do this. So that what we're going to do in this exercise is we're going to draw a cylindrical object and a rectangular object grouped together a little below the eye, showing proper perspective, light, and shade. So again, you can use any objects you like. I've personally got a few things that I got from my house. So they're not cylindrical and rectangular. I've got a spherical kind of object, which is an apple. And I've got a cylindrical object, which is a mug with an apple on it. And I'm going to actually put these on the table in front of me. And I'm going to draw them, but I'm going to draw them from a particular perspective. So I'm placing them lower than I am. So from that perspective, I should be able to see them in a different kind of view. If you've got a rectangular object, something like a phone as well, you can use, or anything really. But we're going to just draw a little bit of a still life. Again, you can copy my drawing if you want. But if you have any objects on the table around you that you'd like to try this out, this is going to be a still life drawing, but we're going to think about our perspective. Okay, let's get straight into it.
Ashley,
So
as you're starting to draw, people are asking,
yeah.
When it comes to perspectives, there was option 1, option 2, and option 3. They're asking, are the names of these perspectives or just so you mentioned.
So you mean there were 2 things we looked at. So there was the height, which was bird's eye, worm's eye, or eye level.
So that's what it is. Okay, no,
so
that's what people miss. That's okay, no problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. And then the one before that, by the way, was 1-point, 2-point, or 3-point perspective. That's really useful for buildings, especially. Okay, so I'm going to get started drawing my objects here. I think I'm going to bring my phone into play as well. So we have a nice rectangular object. And I'm just going to try and draw them from the perspective I can see them. So, for example, if I was drawing them dead on, that eye level view, straight in front, what they look like is I've got that mug that I had. That would look like this. Just in front of it, I've got the apple. And that would look sort of like this. And now I've got my phone on the table as well. And that would look like this. Now that's the simple, just straight on view. But because I'm bringing in some perspective, things look a little bit different. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw the mug. And you can see as I'm drawing the mug, even though the top of the mug is really circular, it's more like an egg shape for me, from my perspective. And then as I draw the sides of it, because I'm above it, the vanishing point is just below. So the sides aren't straight, they actually get closer together towards the bottom. And that's how I see it from my perspective. Now, if I was really far up and looking down in it, that might be more of an extreme angle. From where I can see it, it looks a lot like this. But if I was really high above it, that would look more round, and the sides might look even closer together, like so. But from where I am, that looks about right. Now, same thing with the apple. Instead of being straight on, because I'm above it, that changes how much of it I can actually see. So it sort of tapers towards the bottom, but what I can see much bigger is the top of that apple. And I can see, just think like we said with the bird's eye view, if you were looking down at something, you'd see the top of the head much more. Well, I can see the top of the apple where the stalk is coming out a lot clearer. And then finally, my phone isn't just looking flat, it's actually angling to the side a bit because it's facing away from me a little bit. So this is how my phone looks from my point of view. And yeah, apologies, I can't turn the camera on these objects while I'm drawing, but you guys can take my word for it. So this is roughly what I can see from my point of view, from my perspective. Now, as I draw that, one thing you can do if you have more time, a lot of people do this when they're doing architectural drawings, is you'll actually draw the vanishing points onto your drawing. But for us now, we don't really have that much time. The only thing that I would probably add to this is once I'm happy with it, the perspective is right, as I'm adding more details, I might try and get that shading to work to make this look more realistic. So for example, my shading, I'll figure out where my light source is coming from, maybe from here. And I'll make sure that as I'm shading, that I get my shading in the right place. So just away from that light source, it's going to be darker. And also how that shading comes around the edge of that apple as well. And also think about with your perspective, how the shading would come away from the object on the ground, like we said before. Okay. Like so. Fantastic. Does that make sense, guys? Give me a thumbs up if that's all making sense to you. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, the last few things we're going to do, we're doing okay for time, but we're very nearly wrapping up. We've looked at perspective. What we haven't yet really looked at in detail, though, is landscapes. So we're going to finish off by looking at some stuff for landscapes, and we're going to give you guys a little task to do after the session as well, if we can. So from a landscapes point of view, we had a really good question, which was how do you show objects in the foreground in a landscape? So here we have a landscape. Once again, the first thing to kind of understand how to draw this is to break it down into the different areas that make up the landscape. So those areas really would be that purple area that's highlighted would be my background. That red area is my middle ground. And the blue area is my foreground. It's the object really close to me. Technically, I guess a few of those tree branches you can see in the corner just there would count as my foreground as well. Now, I'd love to just ask in the chat, how do you think you'd draw those parts differently? How would you draw the background differently from the middle ground and the foreground? What techniques would you use, do you guys think, to make them stand out each individually?
All right, let's check our chats and comment section. Okay, so some people are saying I would draw it in lighter and darker shades. I would use different pencils. Somebody says others would again go with different, maybe just a little bit of a different technique, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it comes to then bigger and smaller, different pens, different shades.
Yeah, you guys are geniuses. That's exactly right. All of those techniques are what you want to be doing. So a few of the things you want to think about is, firstly, I guess the most important one is how dark to how light you're drawing. When you're drawing background areas, you tend to have them lighter, and the foreground areas would be darker. Now, it's funny because this actually happens in the real world with our eyes. If you look at a mountain range that's further away, it looks a bit lighter. There's a bit of haziness in the air between you and that really far away object that makes it look lighter. So mountains that are far away look lighter than the ones that are closer to you. So you do the same thing. You can either do that by pressing down less hard, using different materials or using different types of pencils to make the background areas lighter, the middle ground areas a bit darker, and the foreground probably darker still. The other thing that you'd probably do is the level of detail that you add. You know, if you look at the example of these trees in this drawing, you can actually see more detail on the trees in the middle ground and definitely the trees in the foreground. So I would actually, if I'm drawing trees on the mountain in the background, I'd probably just do little triangle shapes that look like pine trees. In the middle ground, I'd actually draw each individual tree with a little stalk to have more detail as you come closer. And the other thing that you're going to try and do, again, is probably think about perspective. If you think about what we said about 2-point perspective, you can see that happening with that foreground object that's really carrying that perspective. With the mountains that are further away, we don't notice that perspective in as an extreme way, so they'd look a bit more flat. So those are a few kind of tips. Now, with that information, what I would love you guys to do is actually make a drawing of some landscape near your home. Now, we're not going to be able to do this in this session, but this and the next activity are things that I'd love you guys to actually do and then send today and I'll post up on the page to complete the honor, because yeah, this, you know, what we've done drawing in 5 minutes is great for the activity, but most drawing, you don't have that pressure of time. You're able to draw at your own speed. So the next 2 things I'd love you to draw in your own time. So drawing of a landscape near your home, what I'd advise is maybe that you go somewhere near your house, take a photo on your phone, maybe on a camera, and then working from that photo, try and draw that out. But remember what we said about foreground, background, and middle ground. Use those different materials and different darknesses to showcase that.
Actually, as you just mentioned, please do send the photos to me. I posted my email, dejan@adventist.uk. Dejan is spelled D-E-J-A-N. Just want to also let you know that as you take pictures with your phones of the drawings that you made, make sure you put that drawing also into your folder. So when the clubs are reactivated, when everything goes a little bit back to normal, you will have that as a proof that you actually completed this honor. So make sure that you keep it for yourself as well. But please send us, you have plenty of time by Wednesday, and we're going to post them on Wednesday. Actually, you will need to come and check them.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, this is the very last activity, guys. So similar thing to what we've just shown, but we'd love you to put it all together in this last activity, which is to draw and shade your own still life. And what I'd love about that, if you find some objects that maybe are some of your favorite things that maybe sum you up, you can get them all together in the still life. So if you like sport, if you're a big football fan, you can have your football in there, maybe your boots. You might have your Pathfinder scarf in there, but get a collection of objects, we'll put them together and make a still life and shade those in. That is the other drawing that I would love to see from you guys for Wednesday. Excellent. Now, the very last point I want to leave you with, guys, is there's actually quite a few texts in the Bible that talk about creativity and drawing, but one that I really want to point out to you is Psalm 33 verse 6, and it says, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth." Now you might be thinking, what's that got to do with drawing? Well, think about it this way. Drawing is something where we exercise our creativity. And the great thing is we worship a creator. Now, you don't have a creator without creativity. And God tells us that we're made in his image. And the same spirit that was the creative force behind making the universe, behind making all these stars that Psalms is talking about, is that same Holy Spirit that gives us the ability and inspires us to draw. So I really hope that helps, guys. I hope you can meditate on that verse. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'd love, Dan, could you maybe close us out with a prayer?
Yes, I can do that. I can do that. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, we want to say thank you for Ash's life, for beautiful gift that you gave him. And we want to say, dear God, thank you so much for being this amazing creator and for making us the way we are. Sometimes we struggle with that image in our head of ourselves, but we know that you want us to be like this because there is a purpose, there is a perfection in imperfection that we see. And as Ashley is drawing, and as you draw the world that you created, God, there is always place to make, to improve, to add a different shade, to add a different color to it. And we just want to ask, dear God, that you give our Pathfinders determination not to give up drawing as they're learning this honor, and we just want to ask the God that they can use it for your glory. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Ashley, a big thank you for this. We would love to give you a big clap, but before that, somebody asked the question, Ashley, would you be willing to teach us also painting honor, which if I remember properly, painting goes after drawing. Ashley, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure we could talk about that and get that arranged.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
why not?
Sounds good. Sounds good. So I'm gonna now unmute microphone for everybody to give a big clap to Ashley. Let me just give you allow participants to unmute. Let's give a clap, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.